Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on German politics. The German federal chancellor intervenes in the election campaign for the Berlin House of Representatives election. In an interview with the newspaper Tagesspiegel, the chancellor attacked the coalition partners of the capital Social Democrats, the Greens and the Left. The main point of criticism is their plan to implement the referendum Deutsche Wohnen und Co. expropriate, with which real estate of large housing construction groups is to be nationalized. Expropriations do not create new apartments, said Scholz. I think it's irresponsible to spread the illusion that with a growing population and today's completely different living conditions, it would be possible to meet the high demand without building new apartments, he said. Scholz also stated that he wanted to keep the promise made by the so-called traffic light coalition in Berlin to build 400,000 new apartments per year in the future. Of course, after everything that has happened in the world, the current price increases do not make things easier. That's what Scholz said to the Tagesspiegel. He wants to meet his goal in 23 and beyond. In order to achieve this goal, the Chancellor is also making the construction industry responsible. Construction companies should be prepared to now plan more apartments that are not designed to be rented, for example, 18 euros per square meter or sold for more than 10,000 euros per square meter, but are aimed at the majority of citizens. According to a media report, Nancy Faeser will initially remain Federal Minister of the Interior, even if the Social Democrats make her the top candidate in Hesse. Faeser agreed on this with Chancellor Olaf Scholz, that was reported by the newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. This Friday, Faeser, who is also the chairwoman in Hesse, is to explain her plans at the Social Democrat event in Friedewald, including a possible top candidacy for the state election. A spokesman for the SPD in Hesse told the German press agency when asked about the Süddeutsche Zeitung report that it was speculation. On Friday, however, a wise decision will be made. A spokesman for the Federal Ministry of the Interior declined to comment on the report. With the sentence, "My heart is in Hesse," at a party conference last spring, Faeser fueled many of the expectations of the Hessian comrades. Since then, however, she has stubbornly avoided making a clear commitment to whether she also sees her political future in her home state. Almost all parties represented in the Hessian state parliament have already declared which top personnel they will use in the election campaign for the vote on October 8th, with the exception of the SPD and the Left Party. The Christian Democrats are entering the race with the incumbent Prime Minister Boris Rhein. Economics Minister Tarek Al-Wazir wants to stand in for the Greens, who are currently co-governing together with the Conservatives. An election victory for the SPD in Hesse is anything but certain due to the strong competition from the CDU and the Greens. In an election poll last fall, the CDU received 27% of the votes, while the Greens and SPD each landed 22% of voters' approval. At the last stop of his 3-day trip to Latin America, Chancellor Olaf Scholz was also unable to persuade Brazil to give Ukraine more support. Brazil will not provide ammunition for the Gepard anti-aircraft tanks supplied by Germany to Ukraine or for Leopard tanks. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva clearly rejected such requests on Monday. Brazil has no interest in transferring the ammunition to be used in the Ukraine-Russia war, he said in a joint press conference. Brazil is a country of peace, and that's why Brazil doesn't want any involvement in this war, not even indirectly, he said. Germany has delivered 30 Gepard anti-aircraft tanks to Ukraine and has pledged 7 more. However, ammunition is scarce. A new factory of the armaments company Rheinmetall for the production of this ammunition is currently being built in Unterlüß near Celle in Lower Saxony. However, production is not scheduled to begin until June. The first batch is scheduled for delivery in July. As early as April last year, shortly after the start of the war, Germany had tried to get Gepard ammunition in Brazil and hoped for up to 300,000 rounds. It is now clear that nothing will come of it. The solidarity surcharge was never intended as a perpetual tax, but almost 30 years after its introduction, there is no end in sight to the levy, and that creates tension. The Federal Ministry of Finance has expressed reservations about the surprising decision of the Federal Fiscal Court not to object to the solidarity surcharge. Of course, we take note of the verdict, said a spokeswoman for the Liberal-led ministry on Monday in Berlin. The position of Finance Minister and Liberal leader Christian Lindner is known, however, and he continues to advocate a complete abolition of the so-called Soli. Government spokeswoman Christiane Hoffmann added that there are different positions in the federal government on that tax. Chancellor Olaf Scholz from the Social Democrats, who as a former finance minister only pushed through a partial abolition, is probably happy that the question has now been clarified. The highest German tax court had previously decided that the surcharge was still covered by the Basic Law, but just still. Mere doubts were not enough to submit the tax to the Federal Constitutional Court. It is irrelevant whether the supplementary tax is earmarked for the construction of the East. The Soli is about annual federal income of around 7 billion euros. Since 2021, only top earners and corporations have had to pay the surcharge of up to 5.5% of income and corporation tax. About 90% of taxpayers are exempt. And according to the court, the federal government recently took in 11 billion euros a year from the levy, which is now only paid by higher earners and companies, as I said. The plaintiff and the Taxpayers Association argued that the solidarity surcharge was unconstitutional in two respects. However, the court declared that neither the expiry of the Solidarity Pact at the end of 2019, nor the fact that only higher earners, the top 10% of incomes, have to pay the surcharge violates the Constitution. The deputy federal chairman of the Christian Democrats, Karin Prien, is demanding that her party declare membership in the Union of Values incompatible with membership in the CDU. Prien told this to the Süddeutsche Zeitung, a newspaper. The Union of Values is an association clearly outside the CDU, which presumes to want to shift the discourse within the CDU clearly to the right towards the AfD, she said. The Education Minister of Schleswig-Holstein reacted to the election of Hans-Georg Maaßen as head of the association. The election is, after a large number of gaffes, now the final proof that membership in this group does not fit in with Christian democratic values. In my opinion, an incompatibility decision against this grouping has now become unavoidable for the CDU, said Prien. The former president of the Office for the Protection of the Constitution was elected on Saturday at a general meeting in North Rhine-Westphalia with 95% of the votes, as the group announced. Maaßen has been making headlines for years with statements on the right-wing edge and has also angered union politicians. Maaßen belongs to the CDU, but party leader Friedrich Merz no longer sees a place for him in the party. In view of the forthcoming parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey in May, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution has warned of impending conflicts in Germany as well. Elections in Turkey are an emotional event for the supporters of extremist organizations related to Turkey, is how the authority explained it to the newspaper Welt am Sonntag. This applies to Turkish nationalists and right-wing extremists, as well as democratic opposition forces and supporters of extremist organizations classified as terrorist, such as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which is banned in Turkey. Neither the Islamic conservative AKP of the governing President Recep Tayyip Erdogan nor its nationalist coalition partner MHP are under the surveillance of the Office for the Protection of the Constitution here in Germany. However, The authorities' task is to elucidate and assess intimidating and violent calls and activities as comprehensively as possible, in order to be able to enable measures to avert danger for people. At the commemoration ceremony for the victims of National Socialist persecution, Rosette Katz looked at well-filled ranks in the German Bundestag, the federal parliament. In her speech to Parliament, the Holocaust survivor focused on gay, lesbian, and trans people who were deported to concentration camps and murdered because of their sexuality. However, the AfD was an exception among the parliamentary groups. Only 27 of the total of 78 MPs from the right-wing Populist Party were present. This is shown by recordings from the plenary hall, and several parliamentarians report this unanimously. Among the MPs who stayed away from the memorial service were prominent representatives such as parliamentary group leader Alice Weidel, Alexander Gauland und Stefan Brandner. Does the AfD consider the memory of the Holocaust to be superfluous? Well, the party responded to a request from the newspaper Berliner Kurier on Friday afternoon. A spokesman for the parliamentary group told the newspaper that the AfD sees the annual commemoration as an appropriate and dignified event. Unfortunately, not all MPs could have attended, partly due to a high level of sickness. Politicians of the right-wing populist and anti-queer party have often attracted attention in the past by relativizing the crimes of the Nazi regime. Above all, the influential Thuringian state leader Björn Höcke. With a view to the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, he had declared that Germany was the only nation in the world that has planted a monument of shame in the heart of its capital. And there you see what kind of an asshole this man is. The fun part is German courts have ruled that everybody without any problem can call him a fascist, and he can do nothing against it because of all the things he's saying all the time. So it is absolutely legal to call him in person a fascist. And that tells more about this man than I could tell you in a long video. But this concludes this week's video on German politics. I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.